For the past 2 years, there has been one single question that I've been asked over and over and over and over and over again. I get asked this question literally every single day. It is by far the most common question in all of AI history, and you yourself have probably asked it. You've probably asked it several times. And this question is really just an indication of a huge problem we have in the world of AI. So what's that question? What is that one question that I get every single day and have answered probably 1,000 different times in 1,000 different ways? It's this: what AI model should I use? In a world where there are literally hundreds of different AI models to choose from, this is an understandable question. When you are presented with a whole lot of options of something, the question naturally becomes which one is the best one. But the reality is, the reason why this question is asked so much and why it hasn't been answered easily in the past is because it's a very difficult question to answer. And in this video, I'm going to hopefully show you why it's a difficult question to answer and give you some guidance on how you might be able to answer that question for yourself. Now, to emphasize why this is such a big problem and why you probably feel the anxiety and the tension of trying to answer that question for yourself, there was a study done decades ago where a research group, they took two groups of people. The first group of people were presented with a small number of jams. They put out samples on a table and they allowed people to come and sample the different jams and see if they would buy one. Another group was given also a set of jams to choose from, only this time they were given many more options, a lot of options to choose from. And the results of this experiment were pretty eye-opening. The group who saw only a handful, a few of options ended up buying more frequently. The group that were presented with more options actually bought less. So the lesson learned here, and the concept now known as the paradox of choice, teaches us that when we are presented with an overwhelming amount of options, we tend to not choose at all. Hence why we have such a hard time with this question of which AI model should I choose. And the AI companies are making it easy for us. OpenAI has 7, 8, 9, 12 models? I don't know, I've lost count. Claude, Anthropic, the makers of Claude, have 7 or so models themselves. Gemini, who knows how many models they've got. And that's only scratching the surface. There are dozens of AI companies fighting to be a name in the space, and all of them having different versions and different iterations and different approaches to their AI models. Now in Magai, we try to make this a little bit easier for folks. When you go to select a model in Magai, yes, we do have quite a few options to choose from, but we don't have every option. One of my jobs, I believe, as the creator and founder of Magai, is to not give users every option under the sun. I want to give our users only the best of the best, enough to cover the full spectrum of capabilities and costs that are available on the market. So Magai will never have hundreds of different options. In fact, we probably have a few too many right now, and I'll be going through and making some adjustments. But even still, there are over 20 different AI models. I think the last I counted was about 28 to choose from. Now, we also try to make it easier in that we have an auto option. Now, this auto option allows you to select it, and then once you send your prompt, the AI underneath the auto model will actually evaluate your prompt, and based on a bunch of data that we've collected, it will route it to the best LLM for that particular prompt. But even still, it's always best to have a rich understanding of how these models work and what they're good and bad at so that you can eventually make the decision for yourself. But how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is through looking at evaluations of these models. Now, every time a company comes out with a new AI model, they typically have some charts and graphs saying, oh, our model excelled at this, and look how much better it is at this than these other competitors, which is good, I guess. But how much can you actually trust those companies? Of course, they're going to be biased, and they're going to show only the highlight reel and not show you where their models were maybe not so good. That's why it's great to have something like the chatbot arena. If you're not familiar with the chatbot arena, this is a place where AI models are put through a ridiculous amount of tests. They are put through the ringer into a virtual arena of sorts where they battle it out to see who is the best of the best. Now, these evaluations are thoughtfully done. They cover a large amount of categories and fields and verticals. And as a user, you can head over to the chatbot arena over on huggingface.co, and you can actually look through and see how every single model that's gone through the chatbot arena lines up to its competitors. And you can see their scoring, and you can see how many votes they got, because these evaluations are not necessarily based on scores, but they're also based on user voting. So you get a combination of technical evaluation and human evaluation. And I think that's what makes it really beneficial. Now, the other thing you can do here on Chatbot Arena is you can sort by category. Now, by default, it's going to be set to overall, so it's going to show you the top ranking overall models, and you can kind of sort through them. Or you can choose a category that makes the most sense for you. For me, it's typically creative writing, and you can see which models tend to excel in that area. Now, even still, these evaluations are extremely comprehensive, and not only that, you have humans who are helping to upvote the ones that they think are better. But it still falls kind of short, and here's why. Most of these evaluations are engineered around general uses in every category. They might specialize in a particular category, but the evaluations are still very generalized. They may not reflect your specific use cases. And some of these evaluations may overemphasize the flashy technical stuff over the actual practical, usable stuff for the average person. So what I've done is I've put together a little bit simpler evaluation process. How do we compare these models in a way that we can figure out which one is the best for our given scenarios? Now, before I start going through my simplified methodology of finding the right AI model, I want to give you a story analogy. Imagine you had a neighbor named John, and John just got access to a fleet of new vehicles. He inherited them from a relative, and now he's got sitting in his driveway a brand new electric vehicle, state-of-the-art, super eco-friendly, and in pristine condition. He's also got a Ford F-350 truck, super heavy duty, souped up, ready to haul the heaviest haul that you could possibly ever want to haul. He's also got a Ferrari concept car with a top speed of 200 miles an hour. This thing is really nice. And then he also has a golf cart, which he can use to cart himself around. Now, John isn't very savvy about how to use these different vehicles for their specific purposes. He's a bit dense, John is. And so over the weekend, he decides to go golfing and takes his Ford F-350 truck across the fairways, all over the greens, and just ruins the club. He's banned for life. And then he has to go grocery shopping and decides, oh, the Ferrari is probably the one I want to take for that, and takes his gas-guzzling Ferrari down the street to the corner market to grab some groceries and head back. Now, obviously, John doesn't quite understand the full capabilities of what he has on his hands. And I think that's how many of us are actually using these AI models if we don't understand what they're capable of. Now, for our intensive purposes, we're going to break up LLMs into two categories. We have the standard LLMs, and we have the thinking LLMs, or the reasoning LLMs. And this is a recent advancement in large language models that kind of breaks them into these two categories. The standard LLMs were the ones that we started with. You send your prompt and they answer quickly. The reasoning or thinking models, these models will first take your prompt and interpret it, and they will attempt to think through the solution, in a sense, responding in a thoughtful process, trying to break down your query and understand the best way to answer that query, rather than just responding right away. The result of this is they can typically handle much more complicated tasks. They get to think through very advanced solutions and tend to be a little more comprehensive in their responses. Now, the thing with that is they tend to be a little more expensive. Obviously, they have to take more processing power in order to complete the request, thereby consuming more energy and thereby encountering more cost. So step one in evaluating which model you should use should always start with what type of problem is it I'm trying to solve? Is it a highly complex problem or task, or is it a simple problem or task? By answering that question first, you can immediately filter out the category of models that would be ideal or not ideal for your given task. For the highly complex and highly advanced and lots of nuance involved tasks, you want to use the reasoning models. For the tasks that are very simple, maybe very straightforward and quick, you want to use the standard models. In Magai, we make this fairly simple. We have little icons next to each AI model we offer, and these icons represent different features or capabilities. If you see a little brain icon on the model, that means it is a reasoning model. It is a thinking model. So if your task requires in-depth thinking and reasoning and strategizing and deep knowledge and nuance, you can easily identify the thinking models right away. Now, the second layer of how to choose the right language model is what capabilities do you need? Do you need it to view an image? Do you need it to respond to an image? Then you obviously need a model that has a vision capability. And in Magai, these are showcased by the eye icon to indicate that it is vision enabled. And lastly, do you need it to perform an action? Is there an outside tool that you need it to use in order to complete this task? For those models, we have the little code icon activated here to show you that it is actions enabled. Now you might say, Dustin, why wouldn't I just choose the most powerful model? Well, we go back to our analogy of John, our somewhat thick-headed neighbor. You don't necessarily need a Ford F-350 to drive across the golf course. You don't necessarily need a race car to go grocery shopping. And in the practical sense for you, using an AI model, the real question here is cost. Now, the heavier, more advanced, more energy-greedy models, they tend to cost a little bit more. And even if you're using an app like Claude or ChatGPT, you actually get limited use of these models. So you really want to reserve the more complicated tasks for the more complicated models, especially when it is a high-value task that is worth the added cost. Whereas if you have a very simple task that doesn't require a whole lot of nuance or strategy or high-level thinking, you want to use a simpler model and not rack up your costs or use up too much of your monthly quota of usage for a given model. And that's why in Magai, again, we also show you how much a model costs based on these usage multipliers. So you can see the more advanced ones, such as GPT 4.5, they cost 20 times as much as the baseline LLM, whereas GPT 4o costs a 1x, which is the baseline. So you can further help your decision-making process by figuring out, number one, how valuable is this task? Do I want to spend a whole lot on it, or does a simpler model with lower cost suffice? Now, again, one of the things that I would add here is that your specific use case might be much different and necessitate a different approach than I might take with that same exact task or category of task. And so really what I tend to tell people, what I think is the most beneficial, is that you just explore. Take a little time and play with the different AI models and see how they respond to everyday tasks that you might have them do. This is literally the only way to understand which model is going to be best for your given tasks. Think of it this way. If you've ever worked at a place where you've had coworkers, after working with them for a while, you might get to know what Bob is good at and maybe what Bob is not very reliable at. And you might be able to learn what Susan is good at and the things that Susan may not enjoy so much or might not do a great job at. As you work with coworkers, you tend to learn their strengths and weaknesses over time. And the only way you do that is by working with them, actually interacting with them. And the same is true with LLMs and any AI model. The more you try them, the more you explore them, the more you will understand what they're good at and what they're not good at. And the benefit of using them inside of Magai is that you can play them against each other. So you can say to one model, write me a haiku about Batman. You can evaluate how that model did with that haiku, and then you can switch to a different model. You can rerun the generation and see how that model takes on that specific task. And you can do this over and over again. You can even have them go back and forth throughout the conversation, having multiple AI models contribute to the same conversation. So my highest recommendation for you is to explore these models. Give them some tasks that you need help with on a day-to-day basis and see how different LLMs respond to them differently. Now, I'm not going to leave you there. I'm going to give you some practical advice from my own experience. Now, having run an AI company for the last 2 years, I've probably had tens of thousands of interactions at this point with different AI models. So I have some opinions and I have some feelings about what these models are good at and what they are not good at based on my own experience. And based on that experience, I've come up with a pretty simple flowchart. And this is the flowchart. Which LLM should I use? And I kind of start out with the evaluation of how complex is the task, right? So I've got some examples here. So for complex analysis or math, if it's a legal document review, something that is highly sensitive and highly nuanced. If it is scientific research, synthesis, and I would even add further, if it requires multi-step strategic elements, then I would go to the reasoning models. That's how I would sort of filter out all of the other standard LLMs. But if it's something like content creation or customer support, answering simple questions, simple data extraction or structuring or summarization, I would probably go with the standard LLMs. Now from there, once we know whether we're doing the reasoning models or the standard LLMs, there's really 3 specific categories of things that I typically filter through. And that is, does this task require creative thinking or ideation? Does it require accuracy, empathy, or copywriting? Does it require structured, verbose, or technical details? Based on those 3 categories, I then have my selections. If it requires creative thinking or ideation, I typically go with O1 from the reasoning model side. O1 is OpenAI's most advanced reasoning model. It is very thoughtful and highly creative, and I found it to be really, really good at brainstorming, coming up with new ideas, or taking new spins on ideas that I might have. I really love it for coming up with analogies with high levels of nuance and even coming up with highly strategic initiatives that require multiple steps and multiple layers of strategy, deep strategy. When it comes to accuracy, empathy, or copywriting, I pretty much always go with 3.7 Sonnet in this case. It is my favorite model to work with at this time. 3.7 Sonnet is Anthropic's newest thinking model. It is actually really good at pretty much everything. But what this model does that the other models don't do is it can actually decide whether or not it needs to go to a thinking process or if it needs to respond straight out. And it's very good at making that decision based on the user's query. And again, it is by far, in my opinion, it writes the best language for human empathy, and it sounds the most human-like. I haven't found any model that I've evaluated that just writes better than Claude does. And you might find that to be different for you. You might have a different approach and you might have a different writing style. But for me, Claude 3.7 is the winner when it comes to accuracy, empathy, and copywriting. Now, if I need something that is highly structured and I want it to be verbose and highly technical, I will go with the Gemini 2.0 thinking model. Gemini, created by Google, is a very technical, very verbose model by default. Now, you can, of course, prompt it to be less verbose and a little more concise, but out of the gate, I've found that it does tend to be a little more verbose, but it does really well with highly structured stuff. So articles, formulating outlines, and that kind of thing. So Gemini 2.0 would be my go-to for those types of tasks. Now, on the standard LLM side, when it comes to creative thinking or ideation, I found that I really like GPT-4o. Even though GPT 4.5 is out, the cost of GPT 4.5 is just ridiculous. It is at a 20x multiplier. It is in some aspects 30 times more expensive than its predecessor, GPT-4o. And I found it's not that much better, at least not enough to justify the cost. I found GPT-4o is still very, very good at standard creative thinking or ideation tasks. Now, for accuracy, empathy, and copywriting, again, I'm going to go with Claude here. You'll see a pattern with all of these. GPTs tend to be the creative thinkers. Claude tends to be the human-like writing and empathy. And then Gemini tends to be the structured. So Claude 3.5 Son is my go-to for the human-like writing. And then Gemini Pro is my standard model that I go to for structured, verbose, and technical outputs. So that's my simple yet not so simple answer to the question, which LLM is the right one for my given task? I hope it's been helpful. Again, the most important thing is that you figure out which one works for your specific needs, and you have that freedom to explore all the different options inside of Magai in one beautiful interface. Remember to start with whether or not the task is simple or complex and requires a lot of thinking and strategizing. And then from there, based on the capabilities and strengths of the model, you can make your selection. If you need any further help on this, my team and I would love to help answer your questions and work with you to figure out which one is the best for your given needs. I hope that helps, and we'll see you soon.